The World Health Organization issues a grim warning over an Ebola outbreak in the northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Uganda MP Bobi Wine urges President Museveni to be more democratic. And in Kenya, finding different ways to make science, math, innovation, and technology exciting and interactive. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidui. You are in for Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. The World Health Organization said on Tuesday that Ebola outbreak in northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo could deteriorate rapidly because of attacks by armed groups, community resistance, and the geographic spread of the disease. At least 100 people have now died in the outbreak out of 150 cases in North Kivu and Ituri provinces. The response is at a critical juncture, although the weekly number of new cases has fallen from about 40 to about 10 in the past few weeks, and more than 11,000 people have been vaccinated. Attacks by armed opposition groups have increased, most attributed to the Alliance of Democratic Forces, following an attack that killed 21 people in the city of Beni, where WHO's operation is based. The city has declared a period of mourning until at least Friday, obliging the WHO's request to suspend its operations. On Monday, 80% of Ebola contacts and 3 suspected cases in and around Beni could not be reached for disease monitoring. WHO's head of emergency response, Peter Salama, told a news conference in Geneva that pockets of reluctance, refusal, and resistance to accept Ebola vaccination were generating many of the new cases.
Yesterday, we were only able to reach 20% of the contacts of confirmed and probable cases in and around Beni. So it means that 80% of people that are at risk of Ebola, at direct, immediate risk of Ebola, were unable to be followed up yesterday in Beni. We know this morning that this ville morte has been extended until Friday, so that means this entire week we may have cases that become more symptomatic and become more infectious that we're unable to respond to. We also see a very concerning trend that resistance, driven by quite natural fear of this terrifying disease, is starting to be exploited by local politicians, and we're very concerned in the run-up to the elections projected for December that exploitation of this very natural fear will gather momentum and make it even more difficult to root out the last cases of Ebola.
Salama says the WHO is extremely concerned that several factors may be coming together over the next weeks and months to create a potential perfect storm. Now to the United Nations General Assembly, U.S. President Donald Trump said Tuesday he would not meet Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, but signaled he was open to a future meeting despite simmering tensions over Tehran's nuclear deal. Washington and Tehran have been increasingly at odds since May, when President Trump pulled out of the 2015 international nuclear deal with Iran and announced sanctions against the OPEC member. The accord, negotiated under former U.S. President Barack Obama, lifted most international sanctions against Iran in exchange for Iran curbing its nuclear program. On Monday, Rouhani said Tehran would not talk to Trump until the U.S. returned to the 2015 deal. Trump wrote in a Twitter post, quote, "Despite requests, I have no plans to meet Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. Maybe someday in the future. I am sure he is an absolutely lovely man," end of quote. Tensions have been rising after a deadly attack on a military parade in southwestern Iran, in which 25 people were killed. The supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, said Monday the attacks had been paid by U.S. allies Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and that Iran would severely punish those behind the bloodshed. Now, for more on the ongoing United Nations General Assembly, I'm joined by VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir. Margaret, another warm welcome to you today. Perhaps of greater interest during President Donald Trump's address to the UN today was his stand about the International Criminal Court, which Africans too have mixed reactions about.
Yeah, I think President Trump said that the court lacks authority, jurisdiction, and legitimacy. And those are really strong words. They follow his national security advisor, John Bolton, who said something similar about a week ago. But having it come from the president at this forum, it's really powerful. And I think it's good news for warlords and dictators around the world who are in fear of the court. You know, how much of a deterrent will the court be now if you know that the biggest power in the world doesn't support it? And I don't think that the United States was ever a great supporter of it, but it didn't obstruct it either. So this is you know, it's not a state party to the court, and it's not been a promoter. And during the Bush administration, it didn't join the court. But it's not obstructed international accountability, and this is a problem because now the Security Council here is looking at issues such as chemical weapons in Syria, the exodus of the Rohingya from Myanmar. You know, there's no, what is the mechanism going to be for accountability on these things if the United States could possibly veto any referrals to have these things sent to the criminal court?
I'm sure we'll be hearing more reactions from African leaders as well as activists who will be saying, well, they have different views about the International Criminal Court. But Margaret, the president also had strong words about the Iranian leadership.
He did, not unexpected. In fact, perhaps not as strong as anticipated. We didn't know if the Iranian president might be the new rocket man for this year. So the fact that he said that the Iranian regime is a corrupt dictatorship was actually pretty calm language for him. And he urged international leaders to isolate Iran so that they would get their bad behavior under control and stop meddling, for instance, in Syria and Yemen and Lebanon. So that was really the scope of his comments on Iran, and he again disparaged the 2015 nuclear deal, which the United States withdrew from in May.
Now, Margaret, again, the American president also stood firm about his America First policy, and he also spoke about international trade reforms. What was the reaction of world leaders?
Yeah, so I think that was a mixed message. It was both for China and for his base voters here in the United States, because we're coming into the midterm election season in November. So he wanted American workers to know that he has their back and that he's protecting them from unfair or imbalanced trade practices. And he basically accused China of being a big abuser of world trade guidelines in order for them to get the best deals. So he was trying to tell his middle-class Americans, I'm looking out for you. So we'll see. We've heard from a few other world leaders this morning. President Trump is usually the second leader to speak. He was a bit late getting here this morning, so he ended up missing his slot and being in the third slot. But we heard from Ecuador, which spoke before him, Brazil, the Brazilian president, very strong, saying we shouldn't be in a phase of isolationism, intolerance. He spoke about fair trade. President Macron of France was just speaking a moment ago. He was also speaking along similar lines. So I think the rest of the world is talking about multilateralism when the United States is taking a more isolationist approach.
Margaret, thank you so much. We look forward to another discussion tomorrow.
Thank you, Esther.
Right. VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir reporting live from New York. Now, as the world leaders meet at the UN General Assembly for the first ever UN high-level summit on United to End Tuberculosis is being held. The summit seeks to accelerate efforts in ending a global epidemic, killing 4,500 people daily and reaching all affected people with prevention and care. Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu spoke with Teresa Kaseva, the director of the Global TB Program, and she asked her about what she expects will be the outcome of this meeting.
We need highest level commitment and actions, because TB is a disease which needs a real multi-sectoral approach. It's so-called social depending disease, and there are very strong linkages with the other sustainable development goals and with the such problems as poverty, malnutrition, insufficient living conditions. And without tackling these problems and targets, the problem of TB will not be successfully solved in time.
Yes. So let's talk about the TB itself and on the medical aspect of treating the disease. What seems to be the biggest burden in containing TB, in the fight against TB? Would you say it's the combination of HIV and TB? Is it drug resistance? Is it the lack of innovation in treatment, prevention? Where is the biggest burden as of now?
All what you mentioned, absolutely right, is taking place. And the burden of TB, the face of modern TB, is now more dangerous than it was 100 years ago. Now the crisis of MDR-TB and the successful treatment only half of the patient is a big challenge. And the access to the treatment, only one of each 4 patients with MDR-TB, according to the global statistics, has access to the treatment. And the treatment is successful only for half of them. And why we're facing with such situation? Again, not simple answer, because of chronically underfunding of TB programs, because very few investments and donor support for the research activities in TB. We have a gap in financing in research up to $1.3 billion US annually. And we have just 2 new drugs for last 50 years, modern drugs for treatment and resistant form of tuberculosis.
What are some of the, talk to us about some of the reasons why we see drug resistance TB, and why are there different types?
If we are talking about drug-resistant TB, we should mention about the global problem of antimicrobial resistance. Yes. You know that it's really growing threat and it's really crisis, and the huge proportion of MDR TB, XDR TB, and in general resistant TB cases is within this AMR agenda. The reasons of developing and growing these problems, there are different reasons, and of course one of these reasons is improper use of the antibiotics and antimicrobial drugs under control use, and there we are analyzing who are the main contributors, as we may say so, in this problem. Of course, absence of the control on the highest level and responsibility for the control of the procurement, the drug procurement in countries is one of the problems. Another problem is the private sector. I mean, private sector providers of the care, not only TB care, but care in general.
Teresa Kasareva, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
That was Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu speaking with Teresa Kasareva, director of the Global TB Program with the World Health Organization. Ugandan opposition lawmaker Robert Kyagulanyi is appealing to President Yoweri Museveni to place statesmanship ahead of political ambitions. In his first official address to the media since his return from the United States last week, Kyagulanyi, better known as Bobi Wine, asked Museveni to think about his life after office. Halima Thumani has more from Kampala.
We want to be free to express our opinions without fear of persecution. This was the message that opposition lawmaker Robert Kyagulanyi, better known as Bobi Wine, directed at President Yoweri Museveni Monday. It was Kyagulanyi's first news conference since he returned from the United States, where he was receiving medical treatment for injuries he says he received last month while in police custody. He accused Museveni of becoming a tyrant who has turned Ugandans into fugitives because they hold a contrary opinion to his. Chagulanyi appealed to Museveni to care more for the next generation instead of the next general elections.
The nation has always been looking up to you. It is not too late, Mr. President, to do what is right. It is not too late to listen to our cries. It is not too late to regain your legacy, to save your legacy, Mr. President.
VOA reached out to a government spokesman for comment on Chagulanyi's remarks but received no reply. Police and soldiers were out in force when Chagulanyi landed at Entebbe International Airport last week to prevent his supporters from holding any marches or rallies. Political analyst Andrew Karamaji describes Chagulanyi's message to Museveni as one of reconciliation, but he doubts the Ugandan leader will consider the message.
I think that he ought to self-introspect and think about what has gone on before, the contribution he has made, the interest of safeguarding his legacy, whatever he has done, which he is now starting to unravel and destroy, and think about those things and now move towards securing that legacy and ensuring that we have the first peaceful transition in our country.
Chagulanyi and 32 others face treason charges for allegedly throwing stones at President Museveni's convoy in the town of Arua. If convicted, they could face the death penalty. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Still ahead on Africa 54, making learning fun in Nairobi. But first, a look at Tuesday's headlines.
Could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
Today's youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them. Today, not tomorrow. So let's connect, let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Up Front every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
Former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and two top U.S. officials have accepted an award for their work to advance democracy around the world. VOA's Ayen Bio reports from the award ceremony in Washington, D.C.
Thank you all for joining us this evening.
A celebration of democracy was on full display at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems Awards dinner, as recipients of the award highlighted Africa's progress. U.S. Senator Chris Coons had kind words about the continent's future.
And I'll tell you, it is, I believe, from the nation of Africa that leaders will rise and have risen, who will challenge us to prove to the world that we mean what we say, that we have not broken faith with the pledges we made more than 2 centuries ago in the small town of Philadelphia, so near my hometown, that we will stand and fight for our democracy at home and everywhere in the world.
Senator Coons was one of 3 recipients of the Charles T. Manat Democracy Awards, which is presented by IFES to 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, and a member of the international community each year. Recipients are recognized for their work to advance democracy around the world. Award recipient Mark Green seized the opportunity to deliver choice words to leaders who use fear and intimidation to detract from democratic ideals.
Those anti-democratic tactics that I've described aren't signs of strength. They're proof of weakness. The authoritarians are not motivated by courage, they are driven by fear.
But it was international recipient Ellen Johnson Sirleaf who commanded the room's attention.
If Africa is to prosper, and that the only way to succeed is to make the institutions stronger than the individuals.
The former head of state accepted the awards as news of missing banknotes dominate the headlines in her native Liberia. The government is investigating the loss of newly printed banknotes worth more than $100 million. Liberia's Ministry of Justice says the money was ordered by Sirleaf's administration and arrived before she left office. Sirleaf has since demanded an investigation and has denied accusations of wrongdoing. Sirleaf, the first elected female head of state in Africa, has endured her share of criticism during her tenure as president, with her opponents accusing her of corruption and nepotism. One attendee says the criticism is part of the job.
You're never going to have any president who's going to rule for 12 years and come out of it without critics. And I think the fact that you see so much criticism is also, it's both a good thing because she's allowed these institutions in Liberia to flourish. There's been incredible freedom of the press. There's freedom of speech. Liberians now feel that they're not going to be thrown into jail for criticizing their leaders.
Freedom House says there is now a global decline in political rights, the lowest in more than a decade. IFES is working around the world to strengthen democracies. Ayan Bior, VOA News, Washington.
Many people say children learn best through trial and error. In the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, Discovery Center, a social enterprise, has developed different ways to make science, math, innovation, and technology exciting and interactive. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
It's been said that being passionate about your work is a key to success. Daniel Gichuki Mohoro is no exception.
We make science and technology fun for children of all ages. Our mission is to stir innovation.
Mohoro's passion triggered him to start a Discovery Center, where children are inspired to develop an interest in science.
Children's innovation and inquisitive nature needs to be nurtured so that when they get to preteen, they are still inquisitive.
Mohoro has turned his love for engineering into a business.
How has this program changed some of their lives?
For the sciences is 6 to 18, so we split 6 to 13. At the coding club, we introduce children from 6 years to all the way to 20 years to computer programming. And we literally start from scratch, pun intended, because we use Scratch software designed by MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Then we take them to a place where we can now win them off Scratch and start them on a proper high-level programming language. Very many parents have told me their children have eased off playing on the phone. They want to create their own games.
Discovery Center is now part of a new infrastructure for children to develop their technology skills. For example, here is a demonstration about sound propagation.
This is a focal point. This voice is reflected this way. We call them the whispering dishes. Put your ear to the circle and the other person speak, but in your faintest whisper.
Audio is very clear. This warehouse is now a creative hub for innovation. As Kenya becomes more connected to the internet, young people are finding new ways to hone their skills and learning how to code to become computer programmers. Like any startup company, Discovery Center is not without its challenges. Critics say that getting these programs rolled out in rural areas has been a slow process. But Daniel Mohoro is hopeful that working with schools and organizing science fairs and projects will eventually pay off.
We know that they are keeping track of how innovation is going on in this country. And if we really want to make an impact, we want to work with them. We collaborate with the Ministry of Education, and Kenya Innovation Agency really helped us, get to join the Science Center body in Southern Africa. It's called SASTEC. And in fact, they facilitated our involvement in last year's Science Center World Summit in Tokyo, Japan.
He says the program has the potential to be replicated across the country. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. At Spill restaurant in the Swedish city of Malmö, meals are made using ingredients that would otherwise be disposed of by local suppliers. And it's not alone. Pop-up restaurant Retaste in Stockholm collects food from supermarkets that would otherwise be discarded on Mondays and Tuesdays and serves up the surprise ingredients on Wednesdays and Thursdays. According to the United Nations agency, the Food and Agricultural Organization, around 1/3 or 1.3 billion tons of the food produced by human consumption goes to waste every year. In Europe and North America, consumers waste between 95 to 115 kilograms per capita each year. Next up, it's drawing time at the suburban nursery school in Japan, but instead of crayons, tiny fingers are tapping on colors and on iPads. Kobe Preschool is among the nearly 400 kindergartens and nursery schools in Japan that are using smartphone software applications designed especially for preschoolers called Kids. It's an example of how digital play is unfolding around the world, helping prepare future generations for the internet age. The Japanese government has recently made strengthening technology education a national policy. But getting toddlers wired is still relatively new in Japan. And finally, drone deliveries are taking off in Iceland. After acquiring its license in August last year, e-commerce company AHA is now expanding its high-flying service to 13 routes. Its drones can deviate 700 meters from those flight paths to complete the final delivery. The service runs from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. They are now seen buzzing across a Reykjavik skyline, carrying orders of sushi, noodles, and burgers from the about 100 restaurants the company works with. AHA claims it's faster, cheaper, and more environmental friendly than traditional car deliveries, and that's what's trending today. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Canaries are little yellow birds.
Canary in a coal mine.
Why are these cute birds in a dark coal mine?
Did you hear about Sarah? The boss took her to dinner and then fired her the next day.
The same thing happened to Jason. The boss took him to dinner and then fired him.
Dinner with the boss